General Hospital spoilers for reveal that the sacred calm that was meant to surround the baptism of Daisy was suddenly pierced by the presence of two figures whose return no one had anticipated, Robert and Holly. As the chapel buzzed with hushed reverence, its stained glass windows catching the soft shimmer of afternoon light, the heavy wooden doors creaked open to reveal the two figures standing side by side. The collective gasp from the room echoed louder than the organ's prelude, but none felt the shock deeper than Sasha, who turned toward them with wide, disbelieving eyes. For so long, she had walked a road of grief and isolation, weighed down by the secrets of her lineage, the pain of betrayal, and the burden of new motherhood. Now, standing in the sanctuary of a building meant to bless her daughter's life, Sasha was face to face with the most complicated pieces of her past, Robert, the father she barely knew, and Holly, the woman who once tore her world apart with a single revelation. But against all expectation, Sasha did not recoil. Her hands trembled, yes, and her breath caught in her throat. But beneath that tremor rose something stronger, a surge of joy she could neither suppress nor explain. The storm of recent months, the custody battles, the broken relationships, the unraveling of safety, had hollowed her, but now something filled her chest again, the undeniable warmth of belonging. Their arrival was not merely personal, it was monumental. The other guests shifted in their pews, whispers multiplying like wildfire, speculation weaving its way through the solemn silence. Many had not seen Robert Scorpio in months. Not since his quiet departure to Europe. And Holly's return was even more unexpected, a ghost from Port Charles's distant drama now walking into the present with enigmatic poise. But their reasons for returning weren't just sentimental. For Robert, this wasn't about showing up to kiss the head of a grandchild he'd never met. It was about reclaiming ground in a city whose moral compass had tilted dangerously off course. Holly's presence wasn't just maternal, it was strategic. She had always moved like a chess master across emotional and political terrain, and her return alongside Robert meant one thing, something bigger was brewing. To Sasha, though, the moment was stripped of all politics and posturing. As she stood cradling Daisy in the crook of her arm, her eyes locked with Robert's, and time seemed to collapse. She remembered the quiet disbelief in his voice when Holly had first revealed the truth of Sasha's parentage. She remembered the ache of having to say goodbye before ever building a real foundation. And now he was here, older, perhaps a little wearier, but grounded and present. It was as if a piece of her identity, long fractured, had found its rightful place again. Holly, too, moved with surprising gentleness, and though the history between the two women was thorny, Sasha could not ignore the protective energy radiating from her as she stepped closer. In her arms, Daisy stirred, as if sensing the shift in emotional air pressure. But while Sasha's heart began to swell with hope, the atmosphere inside the chapel grew tenser by the second. Michael, standing near the baptismal font, exchanged a loaded glance with Carly. Sonny narrowed his eyes, instinctively sensing that this was not just a family visit, it was a message. Sidwell had been circling like a vulture, and now with Robert back in Port Charles, old alliances were reforming beneath the surface. There was something unspoken in Robert's expression. Something that made even longtime allies like Anna and Mac lean in. The baptism, intended to be a day of blessing and renewal, was morphing into a battleground of unspoken motives and barely restrained tensions. And Sasha, caught in the eye of the storm, felt every vibration of what was to come. Her tears welled not just from the joy of seeing her father, but from the weight of knowing that safety would never come without a cost. For weeks she had wrestled with the idea of disappearing, of removing herself from Daisy's life if it meant keeping her daughter safe from the looming threats. And now, seeing Robert and Holly, she understood what their arrival really meant. They hadn't returned just to witness Daisy's baptism, they had come to offer Sasha an escape plan. The kind of plan only international operatives could execute, the kind that involved forged documents, hidden safehouses, and a narrative of death crafted carefully enough to be believed. Sasha's breath caught in her throat as the implications clicked into place. The warmth in Robert's eyes wasn't just paternal, it was a goodbye cloaked in a greeting. As the priest began the opening prayers, Sasha stepped toward the font. Robert and Holly flanking her with solemn dignity. To the other guests, it looked like a family reunited. But beneath the surface, another story was unfolding, one of strategy, sacrifice, and silent decisions. The water poured over Daisy's forehead, holy and symbolic, but also serving as a quiet curtain call for what Sasha knew might be her last public act as the child's mother. Holly reached for her hand discreetly, squeezing it once, firmly. Sasha didn't look at her, but she nodded slightly. She had made her choice. If disappearing meant Daisy would be safe, if it meant Sidwell's grasp could be broken, then she would vanish into the shadows once again, this time not as a broken woman, but as a mother choosing salvation for her child. As the ceremony drew to a close, and guests rose to clap, no one noticed the fleeting glance between Robert and Michael. No one saw Holly quietly slide a sealed envelope into Sasha's coat pocket. And no one could have known that before nightfall, Port Charles would be buzzing with news that Sasha was missing. Presumed dead after a suspicious car accident on Route 39. But those present at the baptism would remember the way she held her daughter close just moments before. The way her eyes scanned every face in the room as if trying to memorize them all. And in that moment, blessed in water, surrounded by saints and sinners alike, Sasha had chosen a kind of resurrection that only the desperate can understand. And with Robert and Holly as her architects, the story of her death would serve one higher purpose, to give Daisy the life Sasha never had. The threat had never truly disappeared, only shifted forms. Waiting for the moment when Sasha would let her guard down just long enough for the danger to pounce again. Now, with Daisy no longer a newborn and beginning to exist in the wider world, the eyes that once hunted Sasha had turned their gaze onto her daughter. A new assault was being orchestrated, not merely on Sasha's safety but on the innocent child who had become the center of her universe. Whispers and shadows surrounded the church following the baptism. And the sanctuary that had once seemed like a sacred place of renewal now carried the weight of silent foreboding. There was no denying it anymore, a new wave of enemies. Emboldened by Sasha's vulnerability and the thinning lines of protection around her, had chosen Daisy as their next target. It was no longer a matter of if, but when. This latest adjustment in the enemy's focus marked the beginning of a catastrophe that was rapidly unfolding, leaving no corner of Sasha's life untouched. The people who had long despised her, those tied to Cyrus, to Sidwell, to the unresolved chaos surrounding her past, had calculated that the best way to destroy her was not through physical harm, but through psychological annihilation. To strike at her child, to fracture the fragile safety Sasha had finally begun to construct, would be the cruelest and most efficient way to break her spirit. And the terrifying truth was that Sasha could feel it happening already. She could feel the noose tightening with each anonymous message, each strange car parked across the street. Each false sense of security that crumbled when she let Daisy play too far from reach. It became clear that this wasn't merely paranoia or motherly overprotection, this was an orchestrated escalation. One of the most disturbing realizations was that the threats against Daisy were not merely bystanders caught in the whirlwind of Sasha's downfall, but a calculated effort to exploit her through the one person she could never live without. And that horrifying adjustment in strategy, shifting the danger from Sasha to her daughter, was enough to throw every part of her world into disarray. In the midst of this chaos, one truth began to surface, sharp and undeniable: she could no longer protect Daisy alone. That's why the return of Robert and Holly wasn't just a family reunion or a nostalgic moment tied to Daisy's christening. Their arrival now took on an entirely different tone, strategic, timely, essential. Robert, with his decades of experience in the WSB and international espionage, immediately recognized the signs that Sasha's enemies were reactivating. Holly, ever observant and eerily intuitive, understood the deeper message embedded in every quiet threat. They weren't here just to witness a spiritual blessing. They were here to stay, to intervene, to protect. Their protective instincts ignited into something primal the moment they caught sight of Daisy, small and radiant in her christening gown, completely unaware of the darkness coiling just outside the church doors. Sasha, still emotionally reeling from the baptism and the bittersweet joy of having her father and Holly present, Now faced a grim reality. There would be no peace unless Daisy was hidden far from the reach of these threats. Robert understood this too well, and so did Holly. Together, they began to construct a plan that would shield Daisy from the encroaching storm. The initial discussions were quiet, held behind closed doors. But the gravity in Robert's voice and the determination in Holly's eyes left no doubt. They would do whatever it took. Port Charles had become unsafe. And the illusion of control Sasha once clung to had officially shattered. What followed was a haunting sequence of adjustments, each one more difficult than the last. Sasha began to prepare Daisy's belongings in secrecy. Holly arranged for a secure location, a safe house tucked far from the public eye. Robert began leveraging old contacts. Calling in favors that hadn't been touched in years, because he knew this wasn't just another mission, this was about family. Sasha watched, heart splitting open with every new step. Knowing that she would have to let go in order to protect. And though the idea of separating from her daughter was unbearable, the idea of letting harm reach Daisy was even worse. This storm brewing around Daisy wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a calculated move that proved just how far her enemies were willing to go. It was a dark echo of Sasha's own past traumas. Reborn now in a terrifying new form, and it forced everyone around her to confront how deeply the danger ran. The trauma wasn't just Sasha's anymore. It had metastasized into her daughter's reality, demanding action before it consumed them all. Through all of this, the one thread of stability Sasha clung to was Robert and Holly's promise. They wouldn't let anything happen to Daisy. They would take her somewhere safe, somewhere untouchable, and make sure that every person who had marked her for harm would be cut off before they could get close. It wasn't just a promise, it was a blood vow, and Sasha knew they would die before they allowed Daisy to suffer. That knowledge didn't erase the pain. But it gave Sasha the strength to endure what was coming. And what was coming wasn't just a minor scandal or fleeting threat. It was a war. One that would redefine alliances in Port Charles. Expose old enemies, and demand sacrifices from those who had already given too much. But in the eye of that storm, one image burned brightest, Robert and Holly standing like guardians at Daisy's side. Ready to shield her from a world determined to steal her innocence. This was more than protection. This was redemption. And it proved that even in a town riddled with betrayal and loss, there were still those willing to risk everything for love. Sophia Matson's decision to re-sign her contract with General Hospital immediately cast a ripple of unexpected shock and urgency throughout the fanbase. After months of cryptic speculation about Sasha's fate and her potential exit from the canvas, this revelation upended all previous assumptions, affirming that Sasha was not, in fact, leaving Port Charles anytime soon. Instead, her storyline was entering a darker, more emotionally charged phase, one that would come at an unimaginable cost. With Sasha's future suddenly secured, it became clear that the narrative storm wasn't circling around her anymore but rather those closest to her. In particular, all eyes shifted to the recently returned Robert and Holly, whose presence at Daisy's christening was no longer merely symbolic, but central to the next chapter of devastation. Their return, once seen as a hopeful anchor in Sasha's turbulent life, now felt more like a target painted in bold red. From the moment they stepped back into town, a sense of foreboding clung to them like smoke before a fire. Their sudden reappearance in such a high-profile moment as Daisy's christening, public, emotional, symbolic, had inadvertently exposed them to dangers that had long been lying in wait. Robert, a seasoned veteran of international espionage, and Holly, no stranger to betrayal and loss, should have anticipated the possibility that their past enemies, or worse, new ones with deeper vendettas, would see this moment of reunion as the perfect stage for retaliation. But they didn't. Or perhaps they did, and came anyway, knowing full well the risks. Because protecting Daisy and reuniting with Sasha outweighed the cost. What no one could anticipate was just how swift and merciless the attack would be. It came like lightning. Before the joy of the christening had even settled into memory, before Daisy's tiny hands had grown accustomed to the rosary Sasha nervously placed in her crib. Before Sasha herself could process what safety truly felt like with her parents nearby, Robert and Holly were gone. Their deaths weren't drawn out or operatic. They were sudden, clean, strategic, the kind of calculated slaughter that only someone with intimate knowledge of their history and weaknesses could orchestrate. No warnings. No monologues. Just silence and blood. And in the wake of that silence came chaos. Their deaths marked the beginning of a psychological unraveling that would grip Port Charles by the throat. Sasha, already fragile, plunged into a grief so profound it became almost feral. She blamed herself, believing that her enemies had simply rerouted their rage from her to her parents the moment they realized she could no longer be broken. And maybe they were right. Maybe Sasha had become too resilient, too guarded, too surrounded by loyal defenders. But Robert and Holly, stepping out of the shadows of exile for a brief glimmer of family and redemption, had left themselves wide open. This new trauma did not exist in isolation. It resurrected old ghosts and reopened wounds in the most vicious ways imaginable. Their deaths weren't just tragic. They were symbolic. They shattered the illusion that anyone was truly safe in Port Charles, no matter how loved, no matter how legendary. And more than anything, they triggered a citywide reckoning. Because now there was a child, Daisy, whose christening had become a prelude to murder. And there was Sasha, no longer just a grieving mother or fragile survivor, but a woman reborn in wrath, determined to avenge the blood that had soaked the church pews meant to represent peace and promise. But the terror didn't end with Robert and Holly's deaths. No. Their assassination marked the emergence of something far more disturbing, a larger conspiracy, an unseen hand moving the pieces, and a clear message: no one, not even the ones believed to be safe, was beyond reach. Those responsible didn't just want Sasha silenced. They wanted to destroy everything that gave her strength. Everything that reminded her who she was. And so a new obsession was born, not within Sasha, but within the collective psyche of Port Charles, a creeping fear that the rules had changed. That history, loyalty, and heroism no longer guaranteed protection. That anyone could be next. What was once a city of survivors had now become a city of witnesses to a darkness that was spreading fast, consuming legacies and rewriting futures. Robert and Holly's deaths would not be in vain. They were a catalyst. They were the scream before the war cry. Because while their physical bodies had been erased, their impact reverberated through every corridor of GH, through every late-night whisper among allies plotting retribution. Through every tear Sasha shed as she cradled Daisy against her chest, silently swearing vengeance. Their assassination didn't weaken Sasha, it transformed her. And with Sophia Matson still in the picture, Sasha's story was far from over. Instead, it was being reborn into something even more compelling, even more dangerous. Sasha was no longer simply surviving. She was preparing for war. And with Robert and Holly's names etched into her soul like battle scars, nothing, not threats, not loss, not even the abyss of grief, would stop her from burning down the world that took them from her. Robert and Holly's return to Port Charles is not merely a heartwarming reunion, it is a storm that has detonated at the heart of the city's most volatile secrets. What began as a quiet arrival timed to coincide with the christening of baby Daisy has erupted into a rapidly spiraling chain of events that no one can contain. The moment they stepped back into the public eye, it became glaringly evident that their presence would not just stir memories, it would awaken dangers, unravel buried truths, and trigger a level of chaos that even they, with their storied pasts, may not be fully prepared for. Their reappearance is now proving to be the match to a long-dormant fuse. And the consequences are starting to consume everything and everyone around them. The intensity with which Robert and Holly have reignited old fears, old grudges, and unresolved betrayals is escalating with each passing hour. Long-standing enemies, forgotten alliances, and even shadowy figures from international intelligence circles are now starting to converge around them. It's as if the walls of secrecy that have protected them for years are collapsing all at once. Their mere presence has become a gravitational force pulling in threat after threat. And the air around them is thick with the kind of dread that only comes when something unspeakable is about to surface. The whispers began quietly. That Robert has returned with classified intelligence that could bring down not just one, but several powerful names in and beyond Port Charles. That Holly has been holding on to a truth, one that could shake the Scorpio family and its legacy to its core. There are rumors of covert missions gone wrong, double crosses involving WSB defectors, and surveillance footage that never should have existed. These aren't just casual conspiracy theories. They're tangible. And they're tied directly to the current power vacuum that has begun to form following the wave of attacks on Sasha, the growing unease surrounding Jen Sidwell, and the carefully veiled manipulations orchestrated from behind the scenes. What Robert and Holly carry is more than just emotional baggage, it's actionable knowledge. Information that could topple regimes, destroy reputations, and turn allies into enemies overnight. The pressure building around them is relentless. And the fear they provoke among those with something to lose is becoming palpable. Suddenly, the streets of Port Charles aren't just dangerous for the innocent, they're a hunting ground for truth. And the truth is hiding behind the carefully guarded eyes of Robert Scorpio and Holly Sutton. The more they speak, the deeper the rabbit hole goes. Holly's fragmented conversations, the moments of hesitation in Robert's responses, the sidelong glances they exchange, all point toward one disturbing reality: they are holding something back. Something so large, so paradigm-shifting, that revealing it could alter the power structure of the city and beyond. But with each passing moment, it becomes clearer that the option to stay silent is slipping away. The enemies are getting closer. The threats are becoming bolder. And the cost of secrecy is starting to outweigh the illusion of safety. This unfolding crisis has also reignited old insecurities in Port Charles's most guarded circles. Anna is watching Robert closely. Felicia and Mac are no longer certain where their loyalties should lie. Even Sasha, reeling from her own personal loss, can sense that Robert and Holly are tethered to something larger than her grief. Larger than Daisy's christening, larger than anyone has yet dared to confront. The implications of their secrets are no longer hypothetical. They are immediate, visceral, and increasingly dangerous. What we are witnessing is not just the return of two legacy characters, it is the violent resurfacing of a legacy war. The secrets Robert and Holly carry are not just personal. They are structural. Rooted deep in the foundations of the institutions that once protected them. And now, with those same institutions beginning to crack under the weight of corruption, betrayal, and ambition, Robert and Holly find themselves not just at the center of attention, but at the epicenter of a political and emotional earthquake that has only just begun to rupture. As these shocks ripple outward, no one in Port Charles is safe from the fallout. Their presence is unraveling alliances, corrupting loyalties, and forcing characters who once considered themselves insulated to choose sides in a battle they didn't know they were part of. This is no longer about one couple's return. This is about a city teetering on the edge of collapse and the two people who, knowingly or not, are holding the detonator. Whatever secrets they're hiding, whatever truths they're protecting, are about to become public knowledge, whether they're ready or not. And when that happens, Port Charles will never be the same again.